A name with a face. Nice to meet you. So I'm the guy on the other end of the email, right?
Right.
So we're going to just go ahead and kind of wait just a minute or two to bring some more people in on the attendees. And then I'll kind of lay out the deal, but we're going to give that at least another minute and a half, because I know there's a lot of people who are attending who aren't quite here yet.
No problem.
Fair enough.
I'm the communication contractor for Jackson County, and I'm just kind of helping do a little bit of moderating of this press conference for all of you attendees, whether you're from somebody in the office up in Salem, or whether or not you're with media. And certainly our panelists, thank you for taking the time to cover this important subject on behalf of Jackson County. So I just wanted everybody to know that this will be recorded. And it is being recorded. So just please make sure that you know that. We'll have Commissioner Dyer will make a presentation concerning the declaration and some thoughts behind it. And then Sheriff Sickler and Watermaster Shalon Haynes will be available to take questions at the end. After the presentation, media, you'll be brought in one at a time. Simply raise your hand in the Zoom and we'll bring you in one at a time. Let's try to limit our questions to 1, 2 at the most for any of the panelists, and I'll try to avoid repetition by asking the same one so everybody can get in and out of here at a decent time. And we may not get to all, but we will certainly try. Shortly after this, we will email out the recording of this as well for everybody. So with that, I would like to introduce the chair of the Jackson County Board of Commissioners, Commissioner Rick Dyer.
Well, thanks, Bill. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for attending this announcement and press availability. I want you to please bear with me, because I'm going to go through a lot of information and try to provide some historical context as to how we arrived at the place we are now. So this morning, the Board of Commissioners approved Board Order number 186-21 and declared a local state of emergency in Jackson County due to the imminent threat to the public health and safety of our citizens from activities related to the illegal production of cannabis in our county. So since recreational marijuana was legalized by the voters of Oregon at the November 2014 general election, the illegal and unlawful production of marijuana in our county has overwhelmed the ability of our county and state regulators to enforce relevant laws in our community. Law enforcement in Jackson County reports a 59% increase in calls for service associated with the marijuana industry, including burglary, theft, assault, robbery, and nuisance crimes. And there's also significant evidence of narco slavery, forced labor, human trafficking, immigration issues, squalid and unsafe living conditions, and exploitation and abuse of workers, child welfare issues, and animal abuse. And also there's been a significant increase in the number of cases and amount of marijuana transported out of Jackson County and out of our state. The county's code enforcement resources to enforce relevant county codes have been overwhelmed as well. Such that citations, which took 3 weeks to resolve prior to 2014, now take 4 months or longer. To illustrate this problem, in 2015, code enforcement had 604 code enforcement cases. 0 were marijuana related. In 2016, we had 902 code enforcement cases to work, 333 of which were marijuana related, which is 37%. In 2021 through September, we've had 1,006 code enforcement cases, 663 of which have been marijuana related. That projects to 1,509 cases, 980 of which are marijuana related. So this has completely overwhelmed our code enforcement process. Some of the common complaints to code enforcement have been the proliferation of illegal greenhouse and hoop houses, illegal grading that causes unchecked erosion, significant environmental damage, and impacts to adjacent properties. There's been illegal and uninspected electrical work that creates fire hazards in our vulnerable rural areas, and many more health, safety, and quality of life concerns to neighboring properties and county residents in general. And in our current declared drought emergency, local representatives of the State Water Resources Department report that they're unable to take any action on nearly 1/3 of the complaints they receive, which include water theft and other offenses that exacerbate the water shortage and put existing water rights in jeopardy. Water complaints have increased from 39 in 2015 to a projected 275 in 2021. That's a 700% increase, while the number of water resource representatives have increased by only 1/2 of an FTE, from 3.5 to 4. As a result of this, out of the 195 complaints in 2021 so far, only 82 have not been able to be pursued. As a need for a resource to address these issues has expanded exponentially, our ability to generate the revenue needed locally and state revenue sharing has been steadily eroded and stripped away by state action. In March 2015 special election, the voters of Jackson County overwhelmingly approved the ballot measure referred by the Board of Commissioners, with a 62.93% of the voters voting in favor of taxes on the production up to 25%, on production, and up to 25% on the retail sale of marijuana in the county. Subsequently, the Oregon legislature enacted and Governor Brown signed Oregon House Bill 3400, portion of which prohibited local governments from enacting any tax or fee on the production, processing, or sale of marijuana, except for a local tax capped at 3% on only the retail sale of recreational marijuana, thus substantially limiting the amount of revenue for enforcement activities that could be generated at the local level. House Bill 3400 also established a statewide tax on the retail sale of marijuana, and from the proceeds of which a portion was to be distributed to local government in Oregon to provide revenue to deal with the ongoing impacts of the marijuana industry. A statewide revenue sharing distribution formula was devised that favored the more populated areas with greater retail activity and failed to adequately compensate counties like Jackson and Josephine that experienced greater production volume and enforcement needs. Under this formula, prior to January 1st, 2021, Jackson County received an average of approximately $700,000 per quarter in revenue for each of the previous 4 quarters as its share of the distribution of statewide taxes on the retail sale of marijuana. In the November 2020 general election, the voters of Oregon passed ballot measure 110, which amended these provisions and dramatically reduced Jackson County's share of the proceeds from the statewide tax. The first distribution of Jackson County's share of the proceeds under the new provisions was reduced to $213,510 from $811,927, which was the last payment prior to the effective date of ballot measure 110. That's nearly a 75% reduction, which further widened the gap between the resources needed and the assistance received. In 2021, the Oregon legislature enacted House Bill 3000, which made certain revisions to the state law governing the production and sale of cannabis in the state of Oregon, including making the production of cannabis without an appropriate registration or license issued by the state of Oregon a crime, providing the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, OLCC, and Oregon Department of Agriculture the authority to inspect cannabis production sites within the jurisdiction of the other agency, provided monetary grants to local governments related to enforcement of laws related to the production of cannabis as well. Under the provisions of House Bill 3000, this year, the OLCC and Oregon Department of Agriculture tested plants at 212 of the 335 registered hemp grows in Jackson and Josephine County. 44% of the farms licensed, 54% of the farms licensed to grow hemp that were inspected by state officials were found to be growing illegal marijuana. There were another 76 farms that declined to allow inspectors on the property, and another 23 farms where inspectors were unable to make contact. It is believed there are at least, again, as many unregistered grows in the region as registered grows with no current provisions under House Bill 3000. So the depth of the problem is clear, and the provisions of House Bill 3000 have provided us with an apparatus to address some of these enforcement issues, but has failed to provide any directed and ongoing revenue to Jackson County for the issues Jackson County is facing related to the impacts of the production of marijuana in the county. As you can clearly see, Jackson County needs substantial state assistance immediately to address this ongoing emergency. The county shall request the assistance of the state of Oregon through Governor Brown and the Oregon legislature to provide the revenue and resources necessary, including but not limited to code enforcement staff needs to triple in size from 3 officers to 9 officers in order to handle the added workload due to cannabis related activities. Our hearing officer panel needs at least 2 additional hearing officers to adjudicate the volume of citations issued by code enforcement officers. Nathan Sickler, Jackson County Sheriff, estimates that additional 18 detectives, 4 patrol deputies, 3 supervisors, and 9 support staff, along with approximately $750,000 in materials and services per year, are urgently needed to address the crimes related to illegal marijuana production. Based on current caseload, the State Water Resources Department needs to assign another 3 full-time equivalent positions dedicated solely to investigating water-related complaints and to handle their current caseload. And finally, OHA, and OLCC need a substantial infusion of additional staff and resources to begin investigating and enforcing state law related to unlicensed and unregistered hemp and marijuana grows, as well as those grows operating unlawfully. So thank you. And unless Sheriff Sickler or Watermaster Haynes has anything to add, we'll start taking questions.
Nothing to add for me. I'll wait for any questions.
Siobhan, same for you. Are you?
Yeah, nothing for me at this time, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Right. So thank you. Thank you once again for all those who are attending. We do have some hands raised. So once again, please try to limit your questions to 1, 2 at the most. And we appreciate your attendance today. So it looks like Katie, you have been brought, Katie Street, I believe, or Strite. You have been brought into the meeting, and please feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. I was wondering, do you guys know how many illegal grows are currently in Jackson County as of now?
So I am going to defer that to Sheriff Sickler. I know an approximate number. I think he has a better grasp on the actual extent of it.
Yeah, so we don't have an exact number of illegal grows because there's so many, and the county is very large, and it would take a considerable amount of time just to even track that kind of information. We just don't have the resources to do that. We estimate though that we have somewhere probably in the neighborhood when you talk about your registered hemp grows and your OLCC recreational marijuana grows, and then we have the ability for small grows for individuals to have that don't require licensing, and then illegal grows that don't have any registration. We're probably up in the 1,000 or more category, and that's a rough estimate. But we provided a flyover video that kind of captured just not the entire county, but some of the larger operations, not including all the smaller ones, that was posted on our Facebook and on our YouTube page a while back. And that can kind of give you an idea of how vast and how big the problem is.
And I know that water theft has been such a topic of interest for viewers. What evidence do you guys have currently with water theft? I know that it's been kind of hard to prove water theft, at least on our end. but what are you guys seeing on your side?
Maybe a question for Siobhan. Watermaster Haynes. You're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
There you are. The joys of Zoom.
Sorry about that. Katie, I apologize. Would you mind repeating your question? It was just a little broken there.
Yeah, no worries. Just with water theft and kind of what you guys are seeing on your end, what evidence do you guys have that shows that water theft is happening, at least in the marijuana industry or illegal grow industry that you guys are seeing on your end? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for your question. I guess, simply the evidence that we have that, unauthorized use is taking place is, the high volume of complaints that we are receiving, and then following up on the complaints that we are able to follow up on, identifying, water users that, either, don't have water rights or are using water from unauthorized locations on their facilities.
How do you guys look at that? How do you guys kind of follow up on those complaints?
We treat cannabis-related complaints very similar to any other complaint. However, on some of these locations, safety often is a larger factor, and so we're having to take multiple people out to do some of those site visits, and coordinating with other agencies to do those site visits as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're bringing in the next person. So Jerry from Channel 12, you are in.
Very good. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Jerry.
Hi there. A couple of questions here as well, and they might kind of pick up on what Mr. Haynes just mentioned, because he's talking about personal safety in just inspecting complaints, which implies some real risk. So my two questions, one is, I'll just go ahead and ask them both here off the top. What conditions here make Jackson County appealing for illegal marijuana grows? And the other is, are cartels involved here? Are there some real criminal risks?
So I believe that's probably a better question for Sheriff Sickler. He deals with the criminal side of these issues, so I'll let him respond.
Yeah, so as far as the first part of your question, we are in an area that is apparently very conducive to growing marijuana. The climates that we have here, the different seasons and the warm summer months and whatnot, and kind of maybe the lighter falls, and then springs as well, I think are conducive to cultivation of hemp and marijuana. And then there's also kind of some name recognition. We're considered in this Emerald Triangle. This area is known for growing high quality marijuana, and I'm sure hemp at this point. And so I would assume, and I've heard, and again, this is more anecdotal, but it commands a higher dollar value across the US and even in other places in the world. So it's a desirable place for people to say they have cultivated their crop in. And then with cartel, we've had cartel presence in our valley for years and years and years. They became, when I started the sheriff's office in 2006, we were mainly conducting operations in very wooded rural areas on Forest Service land or BLM land or private land up in the hills, and those were often cartel funded and operated growing locations. And then as eradication efforts went on for many years, the frequency of those grows were less and less. And then with recreational marijuana, coming into play a few years ago, it changed the dynamics. We didn't have the marijuana being hidden in the hills. We had it more in plain sight. And that's what we're seeing now. And of course, we have identified a large cartel presence in both Josephine and Jackson counties. We've have a lot of investigations going on, and we've hit locations in both counties that we suspect are cartel funded and operated. And so we do have that presence here, and it's more so than it has been in the past. And I think there's a lot of factors to that. Not to get into all of those because I think there's just more going on here, but there's a lot of things I think at play as to why we've seen an influx this year. But nonetheless, is how do we deal with it? It's here, and how do we deal with it? And how do we try to mitigate this and minimize it for next year? This year, the growth season is nearly done. So our teams are very busy, still going out and working. But there will be a little bit of a lull in the wintertime, I believe, if it stays as it has in the past. And we're trying to gear up for next year and try and get ahead of this so we don't have this same thing happen next year for sure.
I believe it's also the cartel presence that seems to be more involved with some of the human trafficking, the human rights abuses, just the humanitarian crisis that we have in this county based on the way some of these folks are being treated. And I think that indicates more of the cartel presence than just a local grower as well.
Thank you. Oh, I'll keep asking questions if I have the floor.
We're bringing in Liam Moriarty. Liam, if you could identify who you're with, that would be great prior to your question.
There we go. Yeah, I'm with Jefferson Public Radio, and I don't have a camera. Sorry, I'm not trying to be mysterious here. Yeah, I did want to ask, and this might be either for Sheriff Stickler or Commissioner Dyer. I'll start with Commissioner Dyer. When you were making your presentation, it seemed pretty clear that the legalization of recreational marijuana has created a situation where what's legal and what's not legal is a lot harder to discern than it used to be. And I think, and we reported on this ourselves a while back when I believe OLCC was doing testing of the licensed hemp operations and found a majority of them, including illegal marijuana inside their legal operation. So since you've got this kind of very gray area between, what is legal and what is not, how can you approach that from a law enforcement perspective and kind of separate out the two, both, cannabis, legal cannabis versus illegal cannabis, legal hemp versus illegal marijuana in with the hemp? How do you approach trying to sort out the legal industry from the illegal one? Well, and I believe, again, you did report on this. I saw you reporting on the efforts of the OLCC and OHA in inspecting the registered hemp grows in Jackson and Josephine County. And what they found on these registered grows is, like I reported, 54% were growing marijuana that was past the legal limit for hemp. And another large percentage didn't allow entry onto their farm. So we can assume that there's potentially something illegal going on there. And then another percentage that didn't even respond. So in the registered market, it appears that the illegal operation, legal activity occurring in those is somewhere in the 75 to 80% range. And then it's estimated that there's another at least 335 or more, Sheriff Stickler estimated somewhere in the thousands of these illegal grows that we have no real enforcement mechanism. House Bill 3000 doesn't allow for that type of enforcement. We don't have the resources, of course, locally law enforcement wise, to go out and try to find and eradicate the hundreds of illegal grows either. So it's a very difficult thing.
to discern. And that's why the resources that we're requesting are absolutely vital to try to do something to eradicate this, again, this situation that is an emergency situation to the health and safety of pretty much all Jackson County residents and Southern Oregon residents for that matter. But I'll let Sheriff Sickler expand on that if you'd like.
Yeah, so good question. So at the beginning of this year, we saw a lot of grows kind of pop up. We saw a lot of these hoop houses, these plastic greenhouses come up almost, you know, a little facetious, but almost overnight. They were just coming up everywhere. And part of what we ran into when there was the ability to grow hemp a couple years ago, is we saw this blur between the hemp industry and the marijuana industry. And when you look at the plants, you can't tell the difference. So, you know, when you sit at a street and you look at a field, it's impossible to say for certain whether that's a hemp plant or a marijuana plant. It has to be tested. And there was no mechanism for law enforcement intervention with places that were registered as ODA grows, or Oregon Department of Agriculture, and hemp grows, because growing hemp without a license was not criminal. And so when you looked at these two places, you could suspect that maybe they were cultivating marijuana, not hemp, but you had to have some sort of mechanism to articulate that. So that would be a test or an admission from the person growing that they were growing marijuana, not hemp. And so you can see that would be difficult because growing hemp without a license isn't a crime, and therefore it was an administrative violation through the ODA. And so that muddied the waters for us quite a bit, and it gave people who were going to act in a nefarious way a pretty secure way of circumventing the systems. And so House Bill 3000 did change the law, and that was something that we asked our legislators to work on. There was a combined effort between the Josephine County State Representative Lily Morgan, the sheriff over there, myself, our representatives locally, to try to get this and work with the OLCC. I don't want to leave anyone out or not give people credit for a lot of work they did on this bill, but essentially now it is a crime to grow either hemp or marijuana without a license. So some sort of licensing through the ODA or the OLCC. The other things that made it difficult was the regulatory agencies, different agencies, one Oregon Department of Agriculture, one OLCC. And so cross-referencing those systems and then the resources that those particular agencies had to deal with their particular regulation. So the ODA had, I think, one inspector that worked in Josephine and Jackson County. And we're talking, there was 330 or 316, I can't remember the exact number, registered ODA grows between the two counties. Now, for one person to inspect all those grows, that's not realistic. So House Bill 3000 provided a provision for the OLCC to step in and assist with that inspection process. So that was helpful. And that was this Operation Table Rock that you referenced in your article. So some things through 3000 made it a little bit easier for us to start that investigative process. So, you know, for us, you know, we check obviously with the licensing authorities, whether that's OLCC or ODA. And if they don't have any licensing, then that makes it pretty clear that now we are investigating post 3000 being signed a crime. And that gets us a search warrant to get on the property. And then that would be a testing of the product to see if this is a cultivation of marijuana crime or if this is just a cultivation of hemp without a license issue. And so that'll help. Now it's a resource issue. You know, we're just recently, House Bill 3000 also provided additional grant funding. So we had a few positions funded through grant monies through the state. And House Bill 3000 expanded that grant money. So we're very thankful for that as well, and the work that went into that bill. So that'll give us additional couple of detectives and support and one other support staff to work on this issue. But again, not near enough if we want to make this problem no longer an issue for Jackson County residents. And so, you know, people who are doing things the right way, there's a lot of good people who are in both industries and trying to legitimize the hemp industry, the marijuana industry in our county, but they're being swallowed up and kind of pushed out by the bad actors, so to speak. So there's just a lot that goes on with it. And there's a lot of nuances, but we are getting, I think, some legislative assistance as far as the rules being changed and the resources at the administrative level. Now we need resources for the investigative pieces and the enforcement pieces.
Now, certainly this summer and fall, there have been a lot of new actions post 3000. You know, it seems like every week or even more frequently, we hear a release about a major bust somehow in Jackson or Josephine or even Klamath counties. How does that factor into the ongoing efforts to get this under control?
Well, you know, I think anytime there's the potential that somebody could be, you know, say investigated and arrested and prosecuted, there is a deterrent fact to that. You know, what we saw initially in 16, 17 was, you know, what we call the green rush, where everybody was moving to, you know, essentially Southern Oregon, Jackson, Josephine counties, Northern California to grow marijuana recreationally, and really just, you know, there was so much so quickly and no resources to deal with it. The OLCC didn't have any resources. We didn't have any resources, and it just kind of got tossed into our laps. Hey, see what you can do. And you know, that changed slightly, and then came hemp. So, you know, our detectives work. We have our IMET team, illegal marijuana enforcement team. They're working, you know, all week long on these locations. And so, you know, we're highlighting a few, the bigger grows and some of the bigger investigations that we've done, but not all of them. I mean, it's just not feasible. So there's a lot that goes on in both counties every day to try to combat this issue. But the problem is so vast and so pervasive that it almost seems like, you know, at times that maybe not enough's being done. I know I get complaints from our members of the public who would like to see quicker responses or more thorough responses to the issues that are next door to their house. And it's not pleasant for me to have to tell them that, hey, our detectives are working on other grows. And, you know, this one is, you know, it's on the list, it's in a queue, but it can't just be an instantaneous show up and make it go away as people would like, because there's investigative processes and things that we have to do that take time. And then there's operational logistics that need to be worked out. And the dismantling of these grows isn't a small undertaking at times either. You have very large operations that span many acres at times, thousands and thousands and thousands of plants and other evidence that needs to be, the plants need to be destroyed or evidence needs to be collected. And there's a lot of people at some of these locations, as we've talked about the human trafficking piece or the labor trafficking. We're trying to identify, you know, with our federal partners, who's involved in those. So if there can be, you know, somebody held accountable for these, that we're trying to investigate that as well. So they're pretty complex investigations.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you, Liam. We're bringing in the next questions. And Vicki, if you could please just identify who you're with. Great to have you join us today.
Hi, Vicki Aldis with the Mail Tribune. Earlier this month, the county commissioners added the 3 FTE to the sheriff's office. So Sheriff Sickler, could you tell me how much was the money that came from the state to fund those 3 positions? And then maybe this is a question for Commissioner Dyer, but you listed a bunch of positions: Water Master's Office, Code Enforcement, Sheriff's Office. Has anybody tallied up the cost of all those positions to see what is the revenue ask from the state?
I'll maybe try first. So we submitted a grant request to the state for, I want to say 16 overall positions for the sheriff's office. And so the way this grant works is it became available, I think the first year was 2017 or 18. I can't remember the exact year. But we applied for that grant and we got enough for, I think, 4.5 positions total. And we shared that with the Medford Police Department because we're working under the our MADGE board and our MADGE team. So it's a kind of a subset of that team. But we have to renew that grant application every 2 years. So we have to reapply. And so this time when we applied for 16 total positions. And that was geared at what was realistic as far as what monies were potentially available, because we kind of had a pre idea of what was available, meaning the pot of money, and that the other counties had also submitted needs and have needs, like Josephine County and Deschutes County, and I think Polk County, and other counties have put in for grant funding, Deschutes. And it's going to become more prevalent across the state as time goes on, I think, and other places are going to need assistance as well. But we're certainly at the tip of the spear in Southern Oregon. So I think our grant request for the 2 years, Vicki, what we requested, if I can just get to your question, I think it was 4.2 million for 2 years. So 2.1 million per year of funding. And then the other, what Commissioner Dyer had talked about in his opening remarks, was if we were going to do try to address all the impacts throughout my organization with patrol, detectives, having a criminal enforcement team that dealt with marijuana and some of the other crime, including labor trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, and then looking at the compliance piece with working with our partners like at the Water Master and code enforcement and the OLCC and the ODA and all that. We put in a substantial request as far as what we would need to deal with the issues thoroughly. And when I say thoroughly, our goal is to be that we wouldn't have the legal cultivation of marijuana in our county at some point with this team in place. And that was considerably larger than even what we sent up to the state for requests for funding for the grant, because that probably would have exceeded or used a good portion of the entire grant. And we knew that there are other counties that have needs too. So I hope that kind of answered your question. If you want me to follow that up, I can.
And I can probably add to that too. Our request wasn't strictly for the funding. It was also if the state chose to send state personnel down to handle some of these enforcement activities, and also to, again, change state law that would allow Jackson County the ability to generate its own revenue as we had prior to House Bill 3400, again, generate our own revenue to, again, allow for the enforcement personnel that we need in the enforcement activity. And I even think, the number we're asking for, I don't think we could ever have enough personnel to go out and eradicate the whatever it might be, 1,000, 2,000 grows out there. What we're looking for, again, is the deterrent factor that gets us to that tipping point that makes it uncomfortable or unprofitable for these entities to do business here in Jackson County. So we're really asking for a minimum amount. It's a sizable sum, and it's a sizable ask as far as what's necessary. But even that is not, I don't think it's even realistic to expect that we're going to be able to go out and eradicate several thousand grows in our county. But we do want to reach a point where the deterrent, again, makes it uncomfortable or unprofitable to engage in that activity in our county.
Thank you.
All right, so and Jennifer, there we go. Thank you, Jennifer. We brought in Tyson. Tyson, please let us know who you're with. And
Tyson from News Channel 21, Bend, Oregon. Just a housekeeping question, actually. Who should I contact to get a recording of this meeting?
so Tyson, were you on the original distribution list?
I was not, which is why I'm asking that.
Okay, if you want to throw your email up in the chat, I'll be happy to write it down and make sure you get that.
I do not see the ability for me to chat with you. If you give me an email address, I'd be more than happy to email someone.
All righty, you got it. It is press@jcorpress.com.
Thank you. I've sent you an email.
Thank you, sir.
Got it. This is Jerry Howard again with Newswatch 12, back for a little more. Commissioner Dyer, probably this one goes to you. What sort of response do you expect from the state? And is there some appeal for federal help as well?
Well, as far as the response we expect from the state, I would love to see them immediately fulfill the requests that we're asking for. I don't know if that's going to be the response. Expectations are, I know that there's an awareness of this problem, and there's an awareness of the need for resources down here. We've been expressing that for months, if not years. It's just, I won't say it's gone unheard, but it's gone hasn't been responded to. So again, the problem has gotten nothing but more severe and more impactful. So now I do hope that there is finally the realization that this is an activity that's regulated by the state, that the state has enacted policies that have made us unable to generate the necessary revenue or resources to take care of the problem here, so that they do accept that responsibility, as we are, again, constituents of the state of Oregon, the state government, the legislature, and it is the responsibility of them to of course help us maintain again health and safety of our shared constituency. So I hope that it's heeded. And as far as your second, I forgot what your second part was of your question.
Whether federal help would be in order or requested, especially for Jackson County, but even to the extent that it crosses possibly into Siskiyou County.
Well, of course, we're going to ask for and accept help from any level, but this is a state regulated activity. It is not a legal activity federally, as we know. So the federal government, as far as their again responsibility to act, is not necessarily again within their responsibility or authority. But we have enlisted the help of our congressmen, our senators. They have been willing to work with us and do what they can. I don't know specifically what that help will entail. There is actually a meeting scheduled with Congressman Bentz, some local politicians, some local representatives of counties, some of our legislators. So hopefully we can again brainstorm what sort of help the federal government can be. We would again welcome whatever that might be. A lot of that may be just again generating awareness and advocacy at that level, because there is obviously, like you say, there are impacts that don't just affect us here locally. The amount of this black market marijuana that's leaving the state, of course, does affect the country as a whole. So I believe they're willing. I just don't know what their capability as far as specific type of assistance might be.
Good, thank you. And I'll make that request for the recording too, Bill.
Thank you, Jerry. All right, Liam is back from JPR.
Yeah, just a quick question, if I could, Commissioner Dyer. You had detailed the request for help from the state, and a significant amount of personnel, 3 to 9 code enforcement officers, 2 more hearing officers, 18 detectives, etc. And Sheriff Sickler had talked about a grant request of $4.2 million for 2 years, which I got the impression from what he said was separate and prior to that. If someone could clarify that for me. And I guess so Vicky asked about what if you had a dollar figure for the current ask, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't think I heard a figure. So did I miss that, or could you direct me to that?
Yeah, as far as I'll let Sheriff Sickler answer what the $4.2 million entail. I do believe that does incorporate part of what we're asking for on the whole package from the state. And again, we're not asking for specifically just dollars. We're asking for whatever resources, whether it's manpower, personnel that is sent down here to help with these enforcement activities. or the ability to generate our own resources locally to be able to take care of this problem. So the dollar amount isn't necessarily the only ask. We're asking for changes in policy or whatever source of assistance they're willing to give, whether it is monetary, whether it is manpower, or just changes in policy to allow us, again, to generate those resources on our own.
But do we, I mean, has anyone put pencil to paper and figured out what the total cost of the manpower you were talking, personnel? I'm just trying to get a sense of scope here. And I know that we're, you know, what you had mentioned, Sheriff Stickler could be a part of that. And I know Commissioner Dyer, you'd said, you know, you would take people instead of money. So I get that too. But I mean, do we have a sense, at least a ballpark figure of the amount of money we're talking about to fund all this? Thank you.
So I can kind of give you the answer. So what we requested through the state for grant funding in this last availability of the grant, the last application. So it was about 4.2 million, I believe, and those are rough numbers. I can get those for you later too, but I believe it was about 4.2 million for 2 years. So 2.1 million per year for personnel. It's the state does a biennium budget process. So roughly that was for 16 positions. Now, when I was asked to present to the county or submit a staffing analysis of what we would need, that was even a little bit broader because that was for all of the impacts, not just what was available through the grant funding. So we have some additional requests, and I have not penciled that out in full. We could do that. It would be quite a bit more than the 4.2 million for the biennium because there's a lot more staff involved in that other request as well. So, but what we were awarded in the grant was 2.5 million, so a little bit short of what we requested. And you know, the issue with a grant, which we're very thankful to have, but is a grant, meaning the money is not guaranteed. And when you run an operation that has sustained costs, you know, with personnel and expenses, running on a 2-year grant cycle can be a little bit problematic, especially when you have to recruit, hire, and train employees. And that process can take up to, say, a year if they're brand new. I mean, they've never worked in law enforcement. So, you know, you're really looking at having to reapply. And so what we have asked, and I believe, you know, through conversations, is sustained funding for these positions until the problem is no longer there, and then beyond, so it doesn't come back, right? So that's kind of what I think part of this is about. Is the grant application is great, but we would also like to see a sustained funding mechanism so that we can count on this this enforcement component long term and not have to worry about, are we going to have funding in 2 years for these positions? Because that does become a, you know, a point of concern for me as a sheriff is, you know, if I don't have grant funding and I don't have the ability to go out and combat these issues, you know, what does that do to our livability, and what does that do for our recruiting, and what does that do for our employee retention? So those issues are also looming, and so I think that's part of the ask is sustained funding as well.
Okay, Commissioner, just if I can, so do you know what the amount of money the county would expect to raise if you were given permission to raise the money locally, which I believe was on a tax on legal marijuana sales, right? So we'd be looking at the legal industry needing to fund or consumers of the legal industry needing to fund the enforcement on the illegal part. Do you have any idea, if you got that, would that provide the amount of money that you would need to fill the positions you feel you need in order to deal with the problem?
No, it wouldn't solely fund. A retail tax would not be able to be the sole funding source for all of these enforcement needs. We would still need, originally we had talked about production, taxes on production, that also would be able to raise an additional amount of revenue. And again, it remains to be seen exactly what that tax structure could look like, to see what sort of revenue it would raise, but it would certainly help us be able to address the problem locally much more effectively than we are now. I don't have the exact number, but again, When we're down to 3%, when the voters approved 25% local retail tax and the production taxes were taken out of the equation completely, it absolutely decimated our ability to generate that revenue at the local level. And nobody, as far as what's happening with these illegal grows, there is no revenue that's generated from those, of course.
Of course. So just quickly, how can I obtain a copy of Order 18621 so I can see the actual text?
We will, I believe that will be posted. I'll let Bill Mance. He's
Okay.
going to have that information available more readily.
So I believe it's already been posted on the Jackson County website. So if it's not, it will be very shortly, but I'm pretty sure it's already up.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You got it. All right, so Katie from KOBI is back on, and we'll make this our last question.
Correct. Do we have an estimate of how much the county or state is losing in revenue based on these illegal grows?
I think that's again, we don't even know the extent of how many illegal grows are operating. I'm sure it's substantial, and it also puts the folks that are trying to engage in this market legally and legitimately at a severe disadvantage. So I'm guessing that it probably deters a lot of people that may be be interested in entering the legal market from even doing that. But I have not seen an estimate, but I'm sure it's a sizable amount.
Thank you.
All right, on behalf of Jackson County, I'd like to thank Sheriff Sickler, Water Master Haynes, and Commissioner Dyer for communicating on this very important issue to our community. Once again, to everybody, the email distribution list, and those of you who have emailed into press@jcorpress.com, we will get out a copy of the recording as soon as it downloads. And we appreciate, once again, all of you, and thank you for attending today.
Thank you all.